It was a
Really? I thought.
well, was it? Well, I can tell you now. It was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did.
An amazing return for Meghan, and you know, as I say, just a tremendous coverage and positive name, and nothing to do with the royal family. So I suspected that that was a lot to do with Meghan's thinking.
Forget everything you think you know about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's fairy tale wedding. What millions witnessed on television was pure theater. But the reality behind those palace walls was a complete disaster. Royal photographer Arthur Edwards, who's covered the monarchy for over 40 years, just revealed the shocking truth about that day, and his words will leave you speechless. He called it the worst royal engagement he'd ever worked, describing the entire event as miserable and deeply disappointing. But that's just the beginning.
Meghan Markle has been described as an absolute control freak.
Of what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. If you want more behind the scenes content like this, smash that like button and subscribe for stories they don't want you to see. Trevor Noah's brutal takedown of Meghan Markle is up next. Watch that video now. Before we dive into what really happened that day, you need to understand exactly who Arthur Edwards is and why his testimony carries so much weight. This isn't just some random photographer with an opinion. This is the man who has been the royal family's most trusted lens for over 4 decades. Edwards has been the Sun's royal photographer since 1977, which means he's captured literally every major royal moment of the modern era. We're talking about Charles and Diana's wedding, their divorce, Diana's funeral, Charles and Camilla's wedding, William and Kate's celebration, and every single royal birth, christening, and state occasion in between. He's photographed 7 royal weddings, 5 funerals, 8 royal births, and 2 coronations.
When he said that Harry and Meghan's royal wedding was miserable, he told The Sun, "I can tell you now, it was the worst royal wedding I have ever."
But here's what makes Edwards different from other royal photographers. He's not just documenting these events from the outside. The royal family has welcomed him into their inner circle for decades. He's traveled the world with them, shared private moments, and built genuine relationships spanning generations. Prince William and Kate have personally thanked him for his years of service. Harry himself used to joke around with Edwards during photo shoots. This is a man who has seen the royals at their best and worst, who understands royal protocol better than most people inside the palace walls.
Meghan Markle and Prince Harry photographed on a sushi date in California. Last week, they celebrated their son Archie,
and who has always maintained the utmost respect for the institution he's spent his life documenting. When Edward speaks about royal events, he's not speculating or gossiping. He's sharing firsthand knowledge from someone who was literally there, camera in hand, watching everything unfold. So when Arthur Edwards calls Harry and Meghan's wedding the worst royal engagement he's ever worked in over 40 years of covering the monarchy, that's not hyperbole. That's not clickbait.
Well, I think people are tired of that.
I think they don't even, when Harry comes to London now, they don't talk in front of him because they know that anything...
That's a damning professional assessment from the one man who has the experience and credibility to make such a statement. And what he witnessed that day shocked him to his core. What should have been the most magical day of their lives turned into an endurance test from the depths of discomfort. Arthur Edwards, who's photographed everything from Charles and Diana to William and Kate, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The brutal sun beat down mercilessly on Windsor Castle as guests arrived in their designer suits and elaborate gowns, completely unprepared for what awaited them inside.
You know, and especially as a woman, it's a lot. So you add this on top of just trying to...
The atmosphere wasn't romantic or elegant. It was suffocating. Women clutched fans like lifelines as sweat poured down their faces, ruining thousands of dollars worth of makeup and hairstyling. Men tugged at their formal wear, desperately trying to find relief from the blazing heat that seemed to intensify by the hour. This wasn't the refined celebration everyone expected. It was pure survival. Edwards himself described the ordeal in the most damning terms possible.
The seating arrangement here is atrocious. The Harry should have sat next to the vice.
After covering decades of royal events, he called this the worst royal engagement he had ever worked. Not just disappointing, not just difficult, the absolute worst. And remember, this is a man who's seen it all, from outdoor ceremonies in unpredictable weather to massive state occasions with thousands of moving parts. But here's what made it even more shocking. The discomfort wasn't some unavoidable accident. It felt deliberate, like the comfort of the guests simply didn't matter.
My gosh, I work so hard, and I appreciate what hard work looks like. I like working hard.
While cameras captured smiling faces for the global broadcast, behind the scenes, people were miserable, trapped in what felt more like a publicity stunt than a sacred family celebration. Edwards was so disgusted by the entire experience that he admitted he couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. And this was just the beginning of the disaster. But the sweltering heat was nothing compared to the slap in the face that came with the seating arrangements. What happened inside that chapel wasn't just poor planning.
He's not only denying the king seeing his grandchildren, he's denying Archie.
It was a deliberate dismissal of decades of royal service and family loyalty. Picture this. Oprah Winfrey, who had met Harry and Meghan exactly once, was treated like royalty herself, positioned in prime seating where she could soak up every camera angle. The Clooneys, complete strangers to the couple, who had never even had a conversation with them before this day, strutted into front row seats like they owned the place. Edwards couldn't hide his disgust, calling it nothing more than showbiz nonsense.
Patrick, I don't want to harp on Meghan Markle. You spend a lot of time defending her, and, I don't even want to go there.
Meanwhile, senior members of the royal family, people who had dedicated their entire lives to serving the crown, were placed into the back rows like unwanted afterthoughts. Military veterans, distinguished relatives, and family members who'd carried the monarchy's weight for years found themselves squinting from the distant seats, while Hollywood celebrities preened for the cameras just feet away from the altar. Edwards, a man who's covered royal weddings where protocol and respect actually mattered, joked that he needed a GPS just to figure out where he was sitting.
Meghan Markle, she is the Duchess of Sussex, who delivered her first speech in Britain. Now, this was the first time since she and Prince...
His view was completely blocked, his decades of loyal service to the royal family counting for absolutely nothing. Guests whispered their disbelief throughout the ceremony, watching as people who barely knew the couple's names were treated like VIPs, while actual family members were treated like background extras. This wasn't about creating a modern, inclusive celebration. This was about which faces would photograph best when the cameras zoomed in. Status and star power had completely replaced tradition and loyalty.
This short 1-minute video shows exactly who Meghan Markle is behind the mask, and we can get a sense without the help of a...
And everyone in that chapel knew exactly what message was being sent. If the seating disaster wasn't insulting enough, Harry decided to turn his own wedding into a personal battlefield against the British media. This wasn't just about privacy or security. This was pure, calculated revenge. Edwards and his fellow photographers found themselves banished to ridiculous distances, forced to work with 800mm lenses just to capture basic shots of the guests arriving. Meanwhile, the couple's hand-picked photographers were positioned a mere 5 feet away.
And I'm dancing around this because I can see you're uncomfortable with my even going there.
Making the whole situation feel deliberately humiliating. Edwards called it hopeless, and he wasn't exaggerating. But Harry's vendetta didn't stop there. During what should have been the iconic carriage shot, the moment every royal wedding photographer lives for, Harry and Meghan made sure to look the complete opposite direction as they past the press area. It wasn't an accident or a missed timing. It was a deliberate snub, Harry's way of punishing journalists for their coverage of Meghan during their engagement. Edwards, who had successfully photographed countless royal moments over 4 decades,
This video went viral on social media this weekend as it shows the shocking moment when Prince Harry completely changes his expression from a
couldn't get a single usable photo published from the entire day. Think about that. A man who captured Charles and Diana's wedding, William and Kate's celebration, and every major royal birth was completely shut out. He felt the entire British press corps was being punished, treated like unwanted intruders at what was supposedly a celebration. This wasn't a man fulfilling his royal duty with grace under pressure. This was someone seething with bitterness, more focused on settling scores than creating lasting memories. Harry had weaponized his own wedding day.
We've heard Meghan Markle is sitting out of the event. Do you think that was the right call, Arthur?
Prioritizing his grudges over the historic significance of the moment. The result was a day that felt more like a hostile confrontation than a joyful union, with the press treated like the enemy rather than the people responsible for sharing this moment with the world. Just when guests thought the day couldn't get any worse, they discovered what passed for a royal reception. What they got was nothing short of embarrassing. Instead of the grand banquets that had defined every previous royal wedding.
Welcome to season 2. It's the same as season 1. Some people says it feels staged.
Harry and Meghan served up what can only be described as a glorified cocktail hour. We're talking about finger foods and tiny canapes that wouldn't satisfy a child, let alone guests who had traveled from around the world and dressed in 1,000-pound outfits for the occasion. Picture this. Distinguished guests, some of the most important people in Britain, standing around nibbling on microscopic bites of avocado toast and dainty macarons while their stomachs growled. Edwards himself was stunned by how inadequate the portions were.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding was miserable and a disaster, according to their wedding photographer, who spoke about how difficult they were to work with.
Especially compared to the abundance and grandeur of previous royal celebrations he'd covered. People were whispering their disbelief throughout the reception. Some guests quietly left early, others were openly frustrated that they'd been invited to what felt more like a trendy brunch than a royal feast. This wasn't some budget constraint or modest preference. The royal family was footing the bill, and they certainly had the resources for a proper celebration. But this was all about image over substance.
Turns out Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing.
The food was designed to look chic and modern for glossy magazine photos, not to actually feed the people who came to celebrate. It was minimalism taken to an insulting extreme, leaving guests craving a real meal and wondering if they'd been pranked. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Just like everything else that day, it was all presentation and no substance. A performance designed for cameras and social media, not for the actual human beings who showed up to support them.
Harry and Meghan did not lose their titles. When they stepped back from the royal family, they were not—
Even the food became another way to show that traditional royal hospitality meant nothing compared to creating the perfect photo opportunity. But the biggest insult wasn't the heat, the seating, or even the inadequate food. It was watching centuries of royal tradition get completely demolished in real time. This wasn't Charles and Diana cementing royal destiny or William and Kate gracefully blending tradition with modern touches. This was Meghan and Harry drawing a line in the sand.
The Duchess of Sussex has denied wrongly using her former HRH title after becoming—
making it crystal clear that they didn't need the family's customs and definitely didn't want their rules. The sermon was delivered like a Hollywood monologue, turning what should have been a sacred ceremony into what felt more like a TED Talk. American-style performances were injected into rituals that had remained unchanged for generations, making the entire service feel like a staged event designed to go viral rather than honor the crown. Edwards noticed it immediately.
The studio lights blaze down on the set of The View where the audience buzzes with anticipation. Their murmurs filling the air like static before.
Nothing about the day reflected the steadiness and continuity that the monarchy represents. Instead of the sacred traditions that had marked royal unions for centuries, everything screamed, "Look at us," rather than honor the institution. It felt like a complete rebrand, not a wedding. The entire ceremony became a showcase for what Meghan and Harry thought royal weddings should look like, completely disregarding what they had always been. Traditional vows were altered, customary protocols were tossed aside, and the whole atmosphere felt more like a celebrity awards show than a royal sacrament.
Buckingham Palace has declined to comment on these claims so far, but this, of course, is the answer to the question that everyone has been asking since.
They weren't building on centuries of history. They were actively dismantling it. Every choice seemed calculated to provoke discussion on social media rather than respect the family paying for it all. Rituals that symbolized loyalty and unity were stripped down, dismissed as outdated, and replaced with flashy moments designed for maximum headlines. For guests who understood the weight of royal ceremony, it was painful to watch traditions that had survived world wars and political upheavals get casually discarded for better camera angles.
In a jaw-dropping moment, Arthur Edwards, a man with decades of royal experience, has nothing to gain.
The symbolism was impossible to miss. While previous royal weddings had been about joining something larger than yourself, this felt like demanding that something ancient and established conform to personal preferences. The monarchy wasn't gaining a new member who would honor its traditions. It was being forced to accommodate someone who saw those traditions as obstacles to overcome, rather than treasures to preserve. This wasn't innovation or modernization. This was burning bridges in real time.
So 7 years, and
this week was their 7th week. Do you remember that? You must remember. Where were you on this? You were there in Windsor.
Oh, I was there. Hated the day.
What should have been a celebration of joining the royal family became a declaration of independence from everything it stood for. They weren't honoring the institution that had given them this platform. They were using it as a launching pad to create something entirely different, something that mocked the very traditions that made the moment possible in the first place. Once the confetti settled and the cameras stopped rolling, the real damage became crystal clear. This wedding hadn't united families.
Hey, hi, I can hear you being angry about Meghan saying that her surname, her family name.
It had blown them apart completely. Harry and Meghan didn't just distance themselves from the royal fold after their big day. They slammed the door shut and welded it closed. Invitations to stay at royal estates were brushed off, with Harry insisting on hotels and private security to maintain total control. They weren't interested in being part of the family. They wanted to be separate from it. Family gatherings became a thing of the past. Grandparents who had dreamed of spending time with Archie and Lilibet found themselves completely cut off.
Hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. And I traveled.
Reduced to watching their grandchildren grow up as strangers through carefully controlled social media posts. Edwards called it heartbreaking, and he wasn't being dramatic. The first pictures of baby Archie that the Queen ever saw were on Edwards' phone, shown to her by the photographer himself. Think about that for a second. The reigning monarch, Archie's great-grandmother, had to learn about her own great-grandchild through a journalist's camera because her own grandson had frozen her out so completely. What made it even more painful was the hypocrisy. Here was a couple that preached endlessly about the importance of family and compassion in their public statements.
All day. I mean, it was a worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. And I traveled the world with him, and I did really enjoy.
Yet they were actively denying their own children relationships with their blood relatives. Cousins who should have grown up together, traditions that should have been passed down, bonds that define royal legacy. All of it sacrificed for what they called privacy, but looked a lot more like punishment. Edwards watched an entire generation of young royals missing out on connections that had strengthened the family for centuries. The children weren't just losing their grandfather and great-grandmother. They were losing their heritage, their sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves.
For those trapped inside, it was nothing short of unbearable. If the heat wasn't enough, the seating plan turned humiliation into a headline.
Every cold shoulder, every refused invitation, every deliberate snub chipped away at any chance of healing the wounds that wedding day had opened. If the wedding was a performance, the Oprah interview was the encore, and it was twice as ruthless. Meghan and Harry didn't sit down with America's most famous talk show hosts to heal wounds or share their truth. They came to detonate. For 90 minutes, they lobbed accusations of racism and cruelty at the royal family.
Meghan shows up, not a speckle of makeup. Not that she needs it, but just sort of interesting, like you're doing a bit.
Painting themselves as innocent victims in a carefully crafted narrative where no one else got to defend themselves or share their side of the story. Edwards called it exactly what it was: a stunt, not a conversation, not a soul-bearing confession, but a staged attack designed to keep the spotlight firmly fixed on them when their relevance was starting to fade. The timing said everything. When public sympathy was dipping, when their star power risked dimming.
So let's meet Prince Harry's beautiful wife, Meghan Markle. Interesting gal, best in history. I remember
they manufactured a scandal big enough to dominate headlines for weeks. The interview wasn't about reconciliation or finding peace. It was about profit, publicity, and brand building at the expense of family members who couldn't fight back. Millions tuned in thinking they'd hear honesty and vulnerability. What they actually watched was a well-rehearsed script crafted to embarrass the monarchy and elevate Team Sussex as martyrs who had suffered unspeakable treatment. But here's what made it even more calculated.
A little
You know how much
tease.
you've done, right?
Yes, we do 16 episodes in the season, so we're at the 9th right now.
They chose Oprah specifically because she represented everything the British establishment wasn't: American, celebrity-focused, and completely removed from the traditions and protocols that governed royal life. It wasn't just an interview. It was a declaration that they were now playing by completely different rules in a completely different arena. Every accusation was designed for maximum impact with minimum evidence. They painted pictures of isolation and abandonment.
She gave People magazine an exclusive interview today.
Okay.
Meghan Markle reveals 4 back-to-school
While sitting in their multi-million-dollar Montecito mansion, talking about financial struggles while signing Netflix deals worth hundreds of millions. The contradictions didn't matter because the narrative was more important than the facts. And the destruction was immediate and total. Families that were already strained were torn even deeper apart. Trust that had taken decades to build was buried beyond any hope of repair. Centuries of royal dignity were dragged into Oprah's backyard and turned into primetime entertainment for American audiences, who had no understanding of the complexities involved.
Silence hung in the air like a heavy curtain at Clarence's house as the door creaked open. Meghan Markle stepped out.
The most heartbreaking part wasn't even the public humiliation. It was watching the collateral damage spread to the next generation. As Edwards pointed out, the real tragedy was the children who would never get to know their grandfather, never build relationships with their cousins, never understand their place in a family legacy that stretched back centuries. All of that was sacrificed for 2 hours of television drama. But for Meghan and Harry, the chaos didn't matter. The backlash didn't matter. The permanent damage to relationships didn't matter.
I'm going to tell you guys a story that directly involves me and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. It literally just happened, and
What mattered was that the coverage was massive. The global conversation was entirely focused on them, and their victim narrative was now locked in place. It was less confession and more extraction. A royal meltdown packaged as must-see television, designed to generate exactly the kind of attention that keeps brands relevant and bank accounts growing. The interview proved that the wedding disaster wasn't a one-time mistake. It was their business model. Create chaos, claim victimhood, and cash in on the controversy.
The worst royal wedding to cover.
Yeah, and then when the baby was born, when Archie was born, that was another...
And it worked perfectly. And that's when everything clicked into place. This wedding disaster wasn't just the beginning of their problems. It was their master plan all along. Looking back, every single choice that seemed so baffling suddenly made perfect sense. The celebrity guest list over family members, the deliberate snubbing of royal traditions, the hostile treatment of the press. None of it was about creating a meaningful ceremony. It was about launching a global brand that would eventually be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
In a stunning turn of events on The Late Show, renowned comedian and political...
They didn't join the monarchy. They took over it, using the royal platform as a stepping stone to something much more profitable. Every decision that chipped away at royal dignity was actually a calculated move to establish their independence from the very institution that gave them their value in the first place. The wedding was their coming out party as rebels, their public declaration that they were different, special, and completely above the traditional practices that had sustained the crown for centuries.
We have this article from The Mirror, written from an interview given by Arthur Edwards.
It wasn't about honoring centuries of history. It was about positioning themselves as the modern, progressive alternative to everything the royal family represented. Edwards watched it happen in real time and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Here was a couple using one of the most sacred royal ceremonies as their personal launch event, treating Windsor Castle like a movie set and the Queen's family like background actors in their own production. Think about it strategically. Meghan understood Hollywood better than anyone in that chapel.
You're putting your children in the wrong type of position with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I thought it was creepy too, him peeking at...
She knew that being the perfect royal bride would make her just another duchess, forgotten in a few years like dozens before her. But being the revolutionary who challenged everything, that was a brand worth building. That was a story worth selling. The American takeover of British tradition wasn't cultural insensitivity. It was market positioning. Every broken protocol became proof of their authenticity. Every offended family member became evidence of how the old guard...
Let's talk about Meghan Markle for a second, because something weird's going on, and it's got a lot of people raising eyebrows, especially...
Couldn't handle change. Every piece of criticism became material for their victim narrative, which would later become the foundation of their media empire. But here's the brilliant part. Every piece of chaos they created became content. Every bridge they burned became a story to sell. Every family member they alienated became proof of how different and brave they were. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony, it was the pilot episode of a reality show that would eventually span Netflix documentaries, tell-all books.
So Meghan Markle finally landed another Netflix deal, and for a brief second, it looked like she was back in the driver's seat.
Podcast deals and speaking engagements worth millions. They turned scandal into currency, and the world watched in fascination as they monetized their own family drama. The heat that made guests miserable, that became part of their story about how uncomfortable royal life was. The press treatment that Edwards called terrible, that became their justification for leaving and controlling their own narrative. Even the family estrangement that followed was pure gold from a business perspective.
King Charles is in a tight spot, and not the kind that even a monarch can wiggle out of. Behind the palace walls, things aren't just
cut ties with the institution, claim independence, then sell access to the inside story that no one else could tell. The children who couldn't see their grandfather became tragic figures in their narrative about choosing freedom over duty. The wedding that looked like such a disaster from the outside was actually a masterclass in brand building. They weren't trying to fit into the royal family. They were showing the world exactly how they planned to break free from it and making sure everyone would pay attention when they did. Edwards realized he hadn't just witnessed the worst royal wedding in modern history.
The King of England, no less, and instead, you come in hot with a list of royal demands that would make even the boldest—
He'd watched the opening act of the most successful royal exit strategy ever executed. The chaos, the drama, the complete disregard for tradition. It never stopped, because it was never supposed to stop. That wedding was their roadmap for turning controversy into cash, and everything that followed was just them executing the plan they'd laid out on that sweltering day at Windsor Castle. And the most frustrating part, it worked perfectly. They transformed themselves from minor royals into global celebrities, from duty-bound family members into independent media moguls, all while claiming they just wanted privacy and peace. The wedding wasn't their fairy tale ending, it was their billion-dollar beginning. And that's the real legacy of Meghan and Harry's wedding. Not a celebration, not a moment of unity, but the opening act of the most calculated royal exit in modern history. What the world saw as a glittering fairy tale was actually a boiling scandal.
Been photographing the royal family since 1977, so when he calls an occasion the worst, he has plenty to compare it to.
Built on arrogance and ambition. Guests baked in unbearable heat while celebrities who barely knew the couple occupied prime seats. Loyal royals were humiliated, photographers were punished for doing their jobs, and centuries of tradition were demolished for better camera angles. But every disaster was deliberate. Every broken protocol was planned. Every bridge they burned became content to sell. They didn't want to join the monarchy, they wanted to use it as a launching pad for their own empire, then abandon it on their way out.
Prince Archie and 1-year-old Princess Lilibet. Rumors have been swirling for weeks that Meghan is pregnant again.
Edwards called it the worst royal engagement he'd ever covered, and he was witnessing something unprecedented. Not just a wedding gone wrong, but the systematic destruction of an institution from the inside, packaged as progress and sold as liberation. The chaos never stopped because it was never supposed to stop. They turned scandal into their signature, controversy into their currency. Every family member they alienated, every tradition they rejected, every royal duty they abandoned.
Denigrated, just terrible. I mean, he doesn't even bother to hide how—
It all became proof of their authenticity, their bravery, their difference. And while the royal family tried to maintain dignity in the face of unprecedented public humiliation, Harry and Meghan built a media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The wedding wasn't their fairy tale ending. It was their billion-dollar beginning, and everyone who suffered through that miserable day at Windsor was just collateral damage in their master plan. That's the truth they never wanted you to know about the royal wedding that fooled the world. But this is just the beginning of how deep this rabbit hole goes. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because we're exposing everything they've tried to hide. The next video will blow your mind even more. Until then, keep questioning what you see, because the truth is always more shocking than the fairy tale.